Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com. And I haven't demonstrated a trade in a while, so I'm going to see if we get one that sets up here. We're headed back to the main trend line. This has been a very strong trend today. You can see, and we're looking, and the trend's still intact. As long as this trend line holds, we're still intact here. Um, we're looking for a possible measured move all the way back up to 47, around 47.11, 47.12 area. So we'll see if we get a setup here. We just triggered a second entry, but I'd at least wait on a high or low here because we just came off the high and we're working back to the trend line and we're not quite there yet. We did push below the EMA. We could take off from here, but I'm going to wait for and see if we don't come back to the key entry point and get a better setup than this, or at least a high or low here. This is where you have to be careful on these corrections because your timing has to be right. And if you don't time it right, you can see clearly there's a second entry here, but I just think it's too early to enter yet. So I'm going to wait. I may miss a trade, but I'd rather miss the trade than enter too early and get stopped out and then watch it go exactly where I think it's going to go, which is higher. So I'm going to pause it and we'll see if we get the setup and I'll restart it. I'm not going to sit here and let this thing just play and record and make this real long, but I just want to kind of set up what I'm looking at here. And when it gets back to the key entry point, we'll see if we get a setup. So that's what we're looking at, and hopefully we'll get a trade example here. But I'm going to pause it, and we'll pick back up when something's going on here. Okay, I updated this a little bit. I noticed that I was not coming off my low here, and so my trend line wasn't quite right. I adjusted it, and you can see that was the reason we were bouncing higher there. And it looks like we're going to go higher. I don't know if we're going to get a setup here or not. This is a strong trend. You got to be careful going long into resistance, but sometimes on these strong trends, if it breaks higher, it's probably going to shoot up because there's probably going to be a lot of sell. The shorts have probably got all their safety stops up there, so it looks like we may get a higher low here. We'll just have to see how this sets up. Um, this one was really tempting, but I didn't think it was back to my trend line yet. But even if you had have entered it, you would have only got a scalp out of it. So looking back at it, the way I've adjusted this, I probably would have entered here if I'd have had my trend line right. And I'm still tempted to go long up here. In fact, I think I'm going to if we break higher right here. Let's just we break above that little double top right there. I'm going to go with it. And yeah, it's a little dangerous going long into resistance like this. But I'm hoping maybe we'll get a little better entry down here with a little room and I can drag this down. But if this breaks higher to a new high and we catch those safety stops up there from all these people that are trying to load up getting short, this thing's probably going to rocket up real fast. So I don't want to force a trade, but at the same time, you can't be afraid to pull the trigger either. This does make this trade a little bit more aggressive. We don't really have a failure yet either, so um, I'm just going to pause it and we'll see what happens. Actually, I should have probably entered right here. See if it'll back up. I don't really want to go long way up there. See if we can get a little better entry here. All right, we're in the trade. Got my stop below the signal bar. If we ever push up here, it's probably going to rocket on up. But we got to get to those stops, and they hadn't quite been able to get it above the high, which is, I believe, this bar right here. Yeah. So we got to get a little bit higher than where we are currently. And that's the danger of going long into this resistance. But sometimes you just have to take what it gives you, especially on a strong trend day. Normally I probably wouldn't attempt this, but this is a very strong trend day. You can see this is a very strong trend. And that's why I was really willing to risk that entry today. You can see the buying's coming back in again. There we go. We're out of our, now you see how it ran and you see how quick that was. You see how quick they ran once they hit those safety stops, it rocketed straight up. And that's what I was expecting to happen. So I wanted to I probably could have got a little better entry than I did. But again, you got to be careful going long into this resistance because on most days you wouldn't want to do this. But on a strong trend day, when you've been going sideways that long, I guarantee you there's a bunch of sales buy stops up there because all these top pickers, and you see how we just ran all their stops and how I took advantage of that. And my runner was out in a second. I probably got out way too soon on the runner, but I didn't want to get uh, a big long trade going. But we basically got, that was a $1,500 trade. So we got $750 on the scalp and $750 on the runner. Anyway, I hope that was, I hadn't done a trade example in a while, and I really wanted to get back in this um, once we got back to the key entry point. And like I said, this trade is a little bit aggressive, but if you recognize the type trend we're in, look at this trend. When you see all these little bars that are like this, that have these little, let me get the crosshairs off there, where there's very shallow corrections. I mean, this is a correction from here to here, and you see how long it took to get from this side of the trend channel back to here, and even then it only went sideways. You didn't get a big correction. That's what strong trends look like. A correction can't even really back up. It just kind of goes sideways back to the trend line. And so that's what I was taking advantage of. When it came back to this trend line, I wanted to get in. You had a bounce off the trend line on a second entry here, and then you had a higher low here, but you couldn't enter on this higher low. If you didn't enter here, you had to wait. And then, of course, we had this little trap right here that it's technically not a failure, but it sets up very similar to a failure. And once they started higher, once they broke higher, you knew it was going to do exactly what it did, as I was describing, because they're going to run those stops on all these shorts here. It's a trap. This was a long trap right here, and the top pickers probably figured, yeah, we're going to catch the top here, and they run their stops real quick. Now you would expect this to pull back and test this again. So, but you got to assume there's going to be enough stops to get a quick. And that's the reason I didn't try to really hold a long-term runner. I might should have held it longer than I did. Got a little more out of it. I mean, this thing could keep going if the trend line holds, which I'm guessing it might. Um, but I just took what I could get quickly. I mean, that was a $1,500 trade, and you saw how long it took. It didn't take but a few minutes. So anyway, I hope that was helpful to you, watching how I entered that trade and what my thoughts were on it. And that was a second entry right there too. Notice that that's a new high. So first entry, second entry. It's not a real clear ideal two-legged entry, but on a day where your corrections are no bigger than that, that's all you probably need. And originally I was thinking if it just broke above this little two-bar matching high, but as you saw, I got a little better entry and probably could have got better than what I even did, but you can't get too aggressive and too conservative because you'll miss the trade. So you may try to get a better entry to give yourself some room, but at the same time, you don't want to get so conservative that you miss the trade. So at this point, I would say we're still headed towards our target up here. Whether or not we'll get there today, I'm not sure. This is a fairly healthy trend. This is not too straight up. It's about a 45-degree angle. So it's fairly healthy trend that could keep going. And so at this point, I'd say the target above is still intact. And you see we're about to get a failed second entry short here. It's not ideal failure, but in a day like this, it might be another one you might take. So we'll just watch it play out here. You can see you would be in the trade now. Your buy stop would have been one tick above that bar. So we have to get to that point right there for that to be a winner. So we'll just watch it. We'll pause it a minute and then I'll open it back up and you can see what it did. Okay, and you can see you would have gotten out of this trade. You would have had to ride out a little bit of a correction here, not much, and then it runs exactly where you think it's going to go, and we're probably going much higher here. We'll just have to see. But that would have been another quick scalp, and you'd probably have a runner going right now, and look at it go again. So, I mean, these are strong trends. So your corrections are not going to be very steep in most cases. That's been the biggest correction. Well, this was a little bigger here. So that's probably been the biggest correction. Well, here's one before. Since the regular session opened, that's been the biggest correction. Here was one. That's a nice two-legged correction. And you would expect that two-legged correction to probably be the middle of the pattern. And if that's the case and we get a measured leg, we're headed to right here at a minimum. And we could go higher than that. But that would be my near-term target as long as this trend stays intact. So, and that's the way it does. It doesn't look like a strong trend because you get all these stems and bars, but look at them. They look like little dojis all through here. But notice the corrections, how shallow they are. That is a strong trend, and you got to learn to recognize that. And that's the difference here. Now, if this was the overnight highs and there'd been a lot of resistance there and this was not a strong trend, I would never recommend going long like I just did there, because I know somebody's going to say, well, you went long right into resistance. You got to recognize the type of day, the context. You got to be able to put it all together. And I was rather confident, or I wouldn't be showing you this trade here if I was out here gambling, because it wouldn't do any of you any good. But I saw what was going on here. I recognized that if it breaks higher, it's going to rock it up. And that's exactly what it did, and I took advantage of it. I had to wait. It had backed up a little bit, but as soon as it gets through there, it hits those safety stops of all these people that are trying to get short here, trying to pick tops, and it rockets up. And that's the way these days kind of do. They run up a little bit, then they go sideways. They run up a little bit. They might correct a little, but you generally don't get very big corrections. They're just real shallow corrections, and then it runs higher again. So, and that's what we're still doing. Maybe this is going to play out and we're not going to reach our target. Who knows? But I like that trade, and I took it, and so hopefully that makes sense to you why I liked entering there. Because on slow range type days or even a weak trend, you wouldn't want to do that. But on this kind of trend where it's just you don't have much other option, because that's what happens. Notice how it runs up and it just works sideways. It runs up, and you get a little mild correction maybe, and then it runs up. And so you had two opportunities to enter here, and here, and here. You had three. This is probably the safest one, but I didn't have my trend line. It wasn't quite right. I drew it from a little higher angle, and I was off a little bit. Either that or it moved on me or something. But that was the better entry. And then I like this one, and then, of course, this one as well. So, and as of this point, the trend's still intact. It looks like they're trying to get a close outside, but I'm betting they probably don't. And it keeps going higher because that's what they do. It keeps looking like it's going to sell off, and then it just goes higher again. So anyway, this is dragging out to almost 17 minutes, so this is kind of long for a trade example, but I did want to explain what was going on, what I saw, why I liked it, and why I wasn't that concerned about the resistance here. This is not a trading range. This is congestion in a strong trend, and there's a difference. You still have to be careful whenever you're going along in that resistance, but on a real strong trend day, you probably won't get much other option. If you notice, all these trades are real entries are real close to the next swing or the next resistance. And so that's just the way these kind of trends work, because they don't back up very much. They don't have big corrections. And you see we're still going higher here. So learn to spot these and learn to find these entries here. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to wrap it up. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com.